Welcome to this video on how to work between fractions, decimals, and percents. Let's get started. Fractions, decimals, and percents are all related, meaning if we know one of them, we can find the other two. And that's what we're going to work on in this video. Here's an example. We have a fraction of 1/10. That's related to the decimal of 0.1, which is related to the percent 10%. All of these have the same value. So that's why if we know one, we can find the form that represents the other two. So let's get to work on that. How do we convert between these? We're going to focus on 4 conversions from fraction to decimal. Then we're going to go from decimal back to fraction. We're going to go from decimal to percent, and from percent back to decimal. This will give us everything that we need. Now, if we have to go from a fraction to a percent, we're just going to have to do 2 steps. We'll go from fraction to decimal, and then from decimal to percent. And our example problems that we have today will do exactly that. So you will get to see that. Here's the first conversion we want to do, which is from a fraction to a decimal. We want to convert 3/8 to a decimal. How do we want to do that? Fortunately, this is pretty easy. You just divide. You divide the numerator by the denominator, and that is going to give you the decimal equivalent. So 3 divided by 8 equals 0.375, which equals our answer of 0.375. It's that easy. Just divide to turn a fraction into a decimal. Going back the other way is definitely the most difficult of these 4. So let's go through that. We want to convert the decimal 0.125 into a fraction. We are going to place these numbers 1, 2, 5, actually 125, over one of these numbers in order to create a fraction. And the number that we choose is going to be based on the number of values we have. 1 decimal, 1 value to the right of the decimal place, we would choose the number 10. 2 decimals, the number 100, and 3 decimals, the number 1000. And we have 3 here, so that's what we will use in this example. And then finally, we want to reduce that fraction to the lowest terms. So we start out with 0.125. We set that up as a fraction, 125 over 1000. Those have the same value. You can prove that to yourself by doing the division here. Set that fraction into your calculator or do 125 divided by 1000, and you will get that decimal. Then we reduce that fraction, and that fraction reduces all the way down to 1/8. Now, once again, a reminder that we used the number 1000 for our denominator because there were 3 values in our decimal that we were converting. 3 values to the right of the decimal point. Okay, let's convert a decimal to a percent. We are converting the decimal 0.125 to a percent. This is pretty straightforward. There's 2 methods that people will use. Multiply the decimal by 100, or move the decimal point 2 places to the right. These will accomplish the same thing. And then add the percent symbol. So we take 0.125, we multiply by 100. I encourage you to follow along with these calculations so you get the same result. And we get the number 12.5. But we want to make sure that we add that percent symbol so that we are describing 12.5 as a percent. Okay, on to the last one. We are now going from a percent to a decimal, and you might be guessing we just have to do the opposite, and that's exactly right. The opposite of multiplying by 100 is dividing by 100, and that's what we can do to convert this to a decimal. Or we can move the decimal 2 places to the left. And then we drop the percent symbol because decimals do not have a percent symbol. So we take 32.5 divided by 100. That equals 0.325. That's our decimal. All right, let's take a look at 3 examples here. But before we get to that, I want to point out a very handy feature on the TI-30 calculator. If you have one of those, there is a magic toggle button that will convert decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. It's located right there above the Enter key. It has 2 arrows on it pointing to either side. If you click that button when you have a fraction in your display, it will turn it to a decimal. When it has a decimal, it will try to convert it into a fraction if it can. Very handy button. All right, let's look at practice problem 1. Which fraction is the same as 87.5%? Now, this is an example where we have to do a 2-step conversion. So we want to go from a percent first to a decimal. So we have 87.5. We talked about the fact that when we're converting this to a decimal, we are going to divide by 100. When we divide by 100, we get 0.875. Now we want to convert this into a fraction. We see that we have 1, 2, 3 values to the right of our decimal point. That means we are going to take 875 and put it over 1,000. And that's our fraction. But we want now to reduce this to its lowest form. This is where you want to take advantage of the calculator and let it do the work for you. And that will reduce all the way down to 7/8. And that's the answer. We did a 2-step conversion. We went from our percent to a decimal, from the decimal to a fraction. Let me clear that off and we'll go to the next problem. In a recent election for class president, the winning student received 210 out of 290 votes. What is this fraction expressed as a percent? Now, what you might be realizing is we have the opposite situation here. We've been given a fraction, so we are going to need to convert that to a decimal and then finally convert that decimal into a percent. So let's do that, 2 steps. This information that was given here, 210 out of 294, is a fraction. 210 out of 294. Now, we previously learned that we can find the decimal for that by just dividing. So I encourage you to divide with me. 210 divided by 294. And I will put a reasonable number of decimals on this, 0.71429. I'm going to round that last digit. So we now have a decimal. What is this fraction expressed as a percent? We need to go that one more step, convert this decimal to a percent. So I'll write that down here. We're going to multiply this decimal by 100. That gives us the number 71.429. Now, there is one more step to this problem. Frequently, when you find percents, you might need to do some rounding. And you only want to do the rounding after it is a percent, not before when it's a decimal. You'll get the wrong rounding. So the nearest percent is the nearest whole number. So we take a look at the whole number. We take a look at the first decimal to the right. It's a 4. That tells us to leave it alone and not round that one up. Our answer is 71% to this problem. All right, one more. The catcher on a baseball team has a batting average of 0.400. How could this batting average be expressed as a percent? And B as a fraction. So let's work on A first. This isn't too bad. We have a decimal. We convert a decimal to a percent by multiplying by 100, and we get the answer 40%. So 40% is equivalent to the decimal 0.400. Now let's go the other direction where we're converting that decimal to a fraction. And we can see that we have three numbers in our decimal. So let's put 400 over 1,000. And now we want to reduce that fraction. We let the calculator do the work there. And our calculator comes up with the lowest terms of that fraction as 2/5. So this is the batting average, but we could say that that batter hits 40% of the time, or we could say that that batter hits 2/5 of the time. Those are all equivalent numbers. All right, that wraps up this video. Now it's time for some practice on your own.